$22 million was accidentally transferred to my bank account. I called the bank to return the money, but when I gave my name, there was a long silence on the other end, and then they said, "Ma'am, this is not a mistake." When I asked, "Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video, and also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Claire Maddox, and for most of my adult life, I believed that if you worked hard, told the truth, and kept your head down, the world would treat you fairly in return. I had no reason to think otherwise. I was 43 years old, a mid-level compliance officer at a regional insurance firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I owned a modest 3-bedroom house on Pembroke Lane, drove a 7-year-old Honda Accord, and made my mortgage payments on the 14th of every month without fail. I had a savings account, a 401k I never thought about, and a checking account that rarely held more than $4,000 at any given time. I was not rich. I was not struggling. I was exactly the kind of person the financial system ignores. Ordinary, reliable, invisible. My personal life was quieter than I would have liked to admit. I'd been divorced for 6 years from a man named Derek Maddox, a commercial real estate developer who had spent the last 3 years of our marriage constructing an elaborate second life I'd known nothing about. After the divorce, I kept the house, the debt, and a wariness of other people's motives that I wore like an old coat. Not comfortable exactly, but familiar. I had 2 close friends, Nina Carver, who taught high school English and called me every Sunday, and Paul Weston, a former colleague who had moved to Atlanta but texted more than anyone I knew. I had a cat named Booth. I went to the farmer's market on Saturdays. I was fine. The first strange thing happened on a Tuesday in October. I logged into my bank account, Piedmont First National, the way I did every few days, just to check that my automatic payments had cleared. It was a habit born of the divorce years, when Derek had drained our joint account twice without telling me, and I'd learned that money you don't watch is money that disappears. I opened the app, tapped through to my checking balance, and stopped. The number on the screen was $22,418,000. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud, a short, bewildered sound, and thought the app had glitched. I closed it and reopened it. The number was still there. I went to the transaction history. The deposit had come in the previous evening at 11:47 p.m., labeled only as wire transfer, internal. No name, no reference number, no explanation. For a few minutes, I just sat at my kitchen table with my phone in my hand and my coffee going cold beside me. $22 million. The number was so far outside the boundaries of my life that it didn't feel real. It felt like a typo, or a test, or someone else's catastrophe rerouted to the wrong address. I knew, with the absolute certainty of someone who has worked in financial compliance for 15 years, that this was not my money. Somewhere, someone was missing $22 million, and they were going to want it back. I called the bank's customer service line at 8:02 in the morning. I navigated the automated menu, pressed 2 for account inquiries, waited 4 minutes listening to a loop of soft piano, and was connected to a representative named Marcus. I told him my name. I told him I was calling about an erroneous deposit. I read him the amount. There was a pause. Not the brief pause of someone typing, not the routine hesitation of someone pulling up a file. This was a long, particular silence, the kind of silence that has weight to it, that tells you before a single word is spoken that something is wrong. Then Marcus said quietly, carefully, "Ma'am, that transfer is not an error." I felt something cold move through my chest. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm going to need to transfer you to our private banking department," he said. "Someone will be in contact with you today." "Wait, what do you mean it's not an error? Whose money is this?" But he was already transferring the call. The piano loop came back. I sat very still in my kitchen, listening to it, and tried to understand why a bank employee had gone silent at the sound of my name. The private banking line rang 7 times before it went to voicemail. A calm, professional voice asked me to leave my name and number and assured me someone would return my call within 1 business day. I left a message. I was precise. My name, my account number, the amount of the deposit, my phone number said twice. I hung up and looked at Booth, who was sitting on the kitchen counter in a wedge of morning light, watching me with the mild indifference of a creature who has never once worried about money. "This is fine," I told him. It wasn't fine. I went to work. I sat through a Tuesday morning of routine file reviews and a department meeting about fourth-quarter audit protocols, and I contributed exactly nothing. My mind was in my kitchen, at my phone screen, at that number, $22,418,000. I had spent 15 years in compliance. I knew what happened when large sums of money moved through accounts without documentation. I knew what federal reporting thresholds looked like. I knew that the Bank Secrecy Act required institutions to file suspicious activity reports on transactions over $10,000 when the source was unclear, and that a wire of $22 million with no visible origin and no name sender was exactly the kind of thing that did not stay quiet. What I didn't know, and what kept scratching at the back of my mind all day, was why Marcus had gone silent at my name. By the time I drove home that evening, I had begun to construct a mental inventory of every possible explanation: an accounting error at another institution, a test of the bank's internal fraud detection, some clerical catastrophe at a wire room that had scrambled a routing number and sent a legitimate transfer to the wrong account. These were the reasonable explanations, the ones that ended with a polite reversal, a formal apology letter, and my account returned to its unremarkable $3,847. But there was another category of explanation, one I kept pushing aside and kept returning to anyway. What if the money wasn't sent to the wrong account? What if it was sent to exactly the right one, and someone had decided that my name should be attached to it? In 15 years of compliance work, I had seen this before. Not to me, to other people. A shell transaction, a layering scheme, a fall account. Someone whose name, credit history, or professional profile made them a useful address for money that needed to move quietly. Usually the person had been recruited, groomed, consented to it for a fee. But not always. Sometimes the choice was made without them. Sometimes ordinary invisible people were selected precisely because they were ordinary and invisible, because no one would look twice. And when the transaction was eventually investigated, there was a real human being to point to. I sat in my car in my driveway for 20 minutes after I parked. If that money had been placed in my account deliberately, then someone already knew my name, my bank, my account number. They had either accessed that information themselves or acquired it. They had enough institutional reach to execute a wire transfer of $22 million. And they had, for some reason I could not yet identify, chosen me. What were the stakes for me personally? I made myself list them. If I did nothing and the money sat there, I could be implicated in whatever it was part of: tax fraud, money laundering, wire fraud, structuring, federal offenses. My compliance career would be over. My house would be subject to forfeiture proceedings. I could be prosecuted. The fact that I hadn't asked for the money would matter, but it would not protect me automatically, not without a clear record showing I'd reported it promptly and cooperated with authorities. If I tried to spend it, and the thought barely crossed my mind before I dismissed it, I would be committing a crime, knowingly using funds from an unlawful source. No, if I reported it to the bank and they stonewalled me, as they seemed to already be doing, I needed a parallel channel. I went inside. I fed Booth. I made tea I didn't drink. I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and started writing. By 10 o'clock that night, the outline of a plan had taken shape. Not reckless, not dramatic, methodical, the way a compliance officer thinks in documented steps with paper trails and contingencies. Step 1. Formal written notification to the bank, sent certified mail, establishing the record that I had reported the error immediately. Step 2. Contact the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and file a preliminary inquiry. Step 3. Consult an attorney. Not tomorrow, today. First thing tomorrow morning. Step 4. Document everything. Every call, every message, every transaction detail, saved and backed up in 2 locations. And step 5, the one that felt the most important and the most frightening. Find out who sent that money and why my name was already known before I called. I was at the office of Diane Reyes, Esquire, by 8:15 the next morning. Diane was a financial crimes attorney in Charlotte. I had known her name professionally for years, had seen her quoted in compliance trade publications, had once attended a seminar where she'd spoken about asset forfeiture law with the calm precision of someone who had seen the inside of every courtroom in the Western District of North Carolina. I had called her at 7 a.m., told her I had an urgent matter involving a large unauthorized deposit and a bank that was not behaving like a bank with nothing to hide, and she had told me to come in. Her office was on the 14th floor of a building on South Tryon Street, with a view of the city and a conference table that was longer than my kitchen. I sat across from her with my legal pad and my screenshots and my certified mail receipt. I had mailed the letter to Piedmont First National the previous evening at the post office on Park Road, return receipt requested, and I walked her through everything. Diane listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, her pen resting against her notepad. "You work in compliance," she said. It wasn't a question. 15 years. Then you already know this is not a normal, misdirected wire. "I know," I said. "The silence from the bank representative when you gave your name," she said. "That's the part that concerns me most." She leaned forward. "That suggests your name was flagged. Not flagged for fraud, flagged for routing. As in, someone at that institution or with access to that institution's systems expected your name to appear in connection with this transfer." The word she used next was one I had been avoiding in my own thinking, because saying it out loud made it real. Insider. Someone inside the bank, or with institutional access, had facilitated this. The transfer had not arrived through normal wire channels. She would request the SWIFT records and originating institution data. But the fact that a frontline employee had gone silent at my name and immediately routed me to a private banking tier suggested that instructions about how to handle calls from Claire Maddox had already been put in place. I filed the CFPB complaint from Diane's office on her computer with her guidance, time-stamped at 9:22 a.m. She drafted a formal legal letter to Piedmont First National requiring disclosure of the transfer's origin under 31 U.S.C. Section 5318 within 10 business days, or she would escalate to FinCEN directly. I left her office with a folder, a retainer agreement, and the first solid structural frame of a defense. The certified mail delivery confirmation arrived on my phone at 11:47 a.m. The bank had received my letter. At 2:15 p.m., I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from a man who identified himself as Richard Hale, Senior Vice President of Private Client Services at Piedmont First National. His voice was smooth and unhurried, the voice of someone accustomed to handling uncomfortable conversations by making them sound comfortable. He said he understood I had concerns about a recent account activity and that he would very much like to schedule a time to sit down with me in person to clarify the situation. He did not use the word error. He did not offer to reverse the transfer. He said he looked forward to hearing from me and left a direct number. I forwarded the voicemail to Diane immediately. "Do not call him back," she replied by text 14 seconds later. "Do not meet with anyone from that bank without me present." That evening, I sat at my computer and did what I perhaps should have done the moment I saw the deposit. I searched the name of my ex-husband. Derek Maddox's commercial real estate company, Maddox Capital Group, had been the subject of a federal civil investigation 2 years earlier. I had seen a brief mention of it in a Charlotte Business Journal article and had not looked further because I had spent considerable effort constructing a life in which Derek Maddox did not exist. But now I searched fully, carefully, systematically. The investigation had been closed without charges, but the reason it had been opened was documented in court filings I found through Pacer. Maddox Capital Group had been implicated in a series of transactions involving a private equity firm called Halcyon Meridian, LLC. Large sums, unusual routing, and Halcyon Meridian, LLC. I found this in a 3-year-old SEC inquiry archived on a .gov database, had a registered agent listed in its original formation documents. Her name was Sandra Reeve Maddox, Derek's sister. I had never met Sandra Maddox. Derek had spoken of her rarely and always briefly. She lived in Atlanta, he'd said. She worked in finance, they weren't close. I had no face for her, no phone number, no image. And yet her name was in a corporate document connected to a firm, connected to the man who had systematically deceived me for 3 years of marriage. I sat back in my chair and felt the particular cold clarity of someone who has just understood the shape of the thing they are inside. This was not random. I had been chosen, and the people who had chosen me were not strangers. Diane filed the formal FinCEN referral on a Thursday morning and sent simultaneous notification to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of North Carolina that her client had received an unexplained transfer of $22,418,000 and that Piedmont First National had failed to respond substantively to 2 requests for origin documentation within the statutory window. I was not present for the filing. Diane had told me to go to work, behave normally, change nothing about my routine. "The most dangerous thing you can do right now," she had said, "is look like you're hiding." So I drove to work. I reviewed compliance files. I ate lunch at my desk. I called Nina on my lunch break and told her, in the vague terms I had agreed with Diane to use with everyone outside the legal process, that I was dealing with a financial matter that was more complicated than expected. Nina said that sounded ominous and offered to bring wine. I said maybe next week. I hung up and watched the parking lot outside my window and tried to feel like a person with a routine. The first contact came 4 days later. I was in my car in the parking garage below my office building when my phone rang. The number was a 404 area code, Atlanta. I answered, "Claire." The voice was a woman's, controlled, warm in a way that had been practiced. "I think it's time we talked." I knew before she said her name. Sandra Maddox. She told me she'd been trying to reach me through the bank, as though Piedmont First National were a mutual acquaintance, and that she was sorry things had gotten complicated, and that there had been a miscommunication about the transfer, one that could be resolved simply and quietly if we could just have a conversation. Her tone suggested I was being irrational about a minor administrative mix-up. Her tone was the most frightening part. "Any conversation we have should go through my attorney," I said. "Her name is Diane Reyes. I'll have her contact information sent to whatever number you'd like." A brief pause. "Claire, attorneys make things messy. This doesn't need to be messy." "Sandra," I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice was. "I filed a report with FinCEN 4 days ago. Whatever this was supposed to be, it isn't quiet anymore. Please call Diane Reyes." I ended the call. My hands were shaking slightly when I put the phone in my bag. I sat in the parking garage for 3 minutes and breathed. Then I called Diane and gave her the exact transcript of the conversation from memory. I had begun keeping a voice memo running whenever I was in my car, a precaution Diane had suggested. Derek called 2 days after that. His number I recognized immediately. I had deleted it years ago and knew it anyway, the way you know the shape of a scar. I didn't answer. He called twice more in the same hour. He left a voicemail on the second attempt. His tone was different from his sister's. Where Sandra had been smooth, Derek was pressurized. The voice of a man who was accustomed to people capitulating and was surprised to find that I hadn't. He said the money was in the wrong place. His phrase, careful and incriminating in its care, and that things could go very badly for me if federal investigators got the wrong idea. He said he was trying to help me. He said he would be in Charlotte on Friday and that we should meet. Diane filed the voicemail as evidence with the U.S. Attorney's Office within an hour of receiving my recording. On Friday, Derek did come to Charlotte. He came to my house. He rang the doorbell at 6:45 in the evening, and I watched him through the front window without answering, his face older than I remembered it, set in the particular expression of a man who has never fully believed that other people mean what they say. He stood on my porch for 4 minutes. He rang twice more. He left. On the advice of my attorney, I had installed a Ring camera 2 days prior. I had the footage. The following Monday, Diane called to tell me that Piedmont First National had received a federal subpoena for all records related to account number 4412-7703-889, my account, and that a secondary subpoena had been issued to Halcyon Meridian LLC's registered banking institution in Delaware. The machine was moving. I had set it in motion, and it was moving. I took 4 days after that. Not vacation. I went to work. I functioned. But I let myself step back from the evenings of legal documents and pacer searches and voice memos. I went to the farmer's market on Saturday. I ate dinner with Nina on Sunday and didn't talk about any of it, and let myself laugh at her story about a 9th grader who had turned in an essay written entirely in song lyrics. Booth slept in my lap. I sat on my back porch and watched the November light go thin and gold over the neighbor's fence and let myself feel, just briefly, like a person who was going to be okay. The offer came through Diane's office, delivered in the form of a letter from a law firm in Atlanta called Whitmore and Galt LLP that I had never heard of, and Diane recognized immediately as a firm that specialized in resolving sensitive financial matters, her phrase, with the particular inflection that meant she was being professionally polite about something that was not polite at all. The letter proposed, in careful legal language that in exchange for Claire Maddox's signed withdrawal of all reports, complaints, and referrals filed with federal agencies regarding the October wire transfer, the sum of $2,500,000 would be transferred to an account of her choosing. The original $22,418,000 would be recalled, and all parties would execute a mutual, non-disclosure agreement. The letter used the word resolution 7 times, $2.5 million. I remember reading it at Diane's conference table on a Wednesday morning, and I remember the specific quality of my feeling as I read it. Not temptation, not exactly. Something more like recognition. I recognized the shape of the offer the way you recognize the shape of something you've been warned about. Here it is, the thing they do when they're frightened. They were frightened. "They're offering to buy my silence," I said. "They're offering to buy your cooperation with an ongoing federal investigation," Diane said, "which would make you liable for obstruction. They know that. This offer is not made in good faith. It is made to see if you are the kind of person who can be purchased. And if you are, they now have a document proving you accepted a payment to withdraw cooperation with federal authorities." I looked at the letter for a moment longer, then put it face down on the table. "File it with the U.S. Attorney," I said. Diane smiled. It was small and precise. "Already drafted the cover letter." After that, there was a period of quiet. Sandra Maddox stopped calling. Derek's number did not appear on my phone. The Whitmore and Galt attorney sent no further correspondence. It was the stillness of people regrouping, and I had been in compliance long enough to know that stillness of that kind was not peace. It was observation. They were watching to see if I'd wobble. I didn't wobble, but I was not made of stone, and I knew it. That was when I called Paul Weston in Atlanta. Paul and I had worked together for 4 years at the insurance firm before he'd taken a position with a risk management consultancy in Atlanta. He was 51, methodical, and had a gift for listening without trying to fix things, a rarer quality than people acknowledged. I called him on a Thursday evening from my back porch, wrapped in a coat against the November cold, and I told him everything. Not the vague financial matter I'd given Nina. Everything. The deposit, the bank, Sandra, Derek, the subpoenas, the offer. He was quiet for a long time when I finished. Then he said, "Claire, are you keeping physical copies of everything?" It was such a Paul question. Not "are you scared" or "what can I do?" but "is your documentation secure?" "Yes," I said. "Diane has originals and I have copies in a safety deposit box at a different bank." "Good." A pause. "You know you're going to win this, right?" I didn't know that. I hoped it. But I hadn't let myself say it or hear it, and the simple declaration of it from someone who knew me and meant it, it reached something I had been keeping carefully locked. "I don't know that," I said. "I do," he said. "I've watched you work for 4 years. You're the most careful, thorough person I've ever met. And whatever they built it assuming you'd either be compliant or invisible. They were wrong about you." Nina drove over on Friday with 2 bottles of Sauvignon Blanc and a casserole dish of chicken and rice that she put in my oven without asking. We sat at my kitchen table until midnight. We did not solve anything. But when she left, I felt less like a woman under siege and more like a woman with people, which turned out to be its own kind of armor. Derek called on a Monday, not from his usual number, from a Charlotte area code I didn't recognize. Clever, I thought, or maybe just calculated. I answered because I didn't know it was him, and when I heard his voice, the faint shock of it, familiar and wrong in the same breath, settled quickly into something harder. "I'm not calling to argue," he said immediately. "I just want to talk." I was standing in my kitchen. I pressed record on my voice memo app with one thumb, silently, the way I had practiced. "Then talk," I said. He came to Charlotte 2 days later. He brought Sandra. I had agreed to the meeting, against my first instinct and with Diane's reluctant approval, because Diane believed it would produce useful evidence and because I trusted my own ability to hold a line. The meeting happened in a conference room at Diane's office, with a paralegal present, and with a clear understanding from me that anything said could and would be documented. They arrived together, Derek in a dark blazer, Sandra in a gray coat that probably cost more than my car payment. They sat across the conference table and presented the version of themselves designed for this moment. Reasonable, regretful, here to clear the air. Sandra's hands were folded on the table. Derek spoke first. He was sorry, he said, that things had escalated. He wished they had been able to handle this as a family, and the word family landed with particular intention, a word aimed at the specific frequency of someone who had once believed herself to be part of his. He said he understood my concerns. He said he was certain we could find a resolution that protected everyone, and that what he and Sandra needed was for the process to stop. The subpoenas, the Finson referrals, the federal attention, before things went further in a direction that couldn't be undone. Sandra spoke next. She was more direct than Derek, and in some ways more dangerous because of it. She said she understood that I had been put in a difficult position, language that neatly erased the fact that the position had been engineered, and that she respected my caution. Then she tried something different. She shifted her tone towards something almost sisterly, almost confiding, as though the two of us shared a private understanding that Derek, she glanced at him briefly, a calculated glance, could not fully appreciate. She said she knew what it was to be underestimated by men who thought they understood the situation better than they did. She said she had always admired people who protected themselves. She said she thought I was smart enough to recognize a genuine offer when one was being made. It was, I realized, the most sophisticated manipulation in the room. Not Derek's blunt family appeal, but Sandra's mirror. "Here, let me show you yourself. Let me suggest that you and I are the same kind of woman. Let me make accepting this feel like self-respect rather than surrender." And then she said, carefully, that she had done some research on my situation. My mortgage balance, she said, my monthly expenses, the limitations of a compliance officer's salary, and that she hoped I understood what $22 million could mean for a woman in my circumstances. She was not making an offer. She was reminding me of my smallness. "I understand what you're trying to do," I said. Neither of them said anything. "You want me to feel that I'm outmatched, that my life is too small to survive this, that the practical thing, the sensible thing, is to step back and let it go and take something for my trouble." I looked at Sandra, then at Derek. "You built this on the assumption that I could be managed. I've had 6 years to understand what you are, Derek. I should have understood it faster, but I understand it now." Derek's expression shifted. The reasonableness dropped, not dramatically but cleanly, the way a mask falls when the person wearing it decides it's no longer useful. "Claire," he said, and his voice was no longer warm, "you are not as protected as you think you are." "This meeting is over," said Diane's paralegal, standing. They left. Derek didn't look back. Sandra held the door open an extra beat, looking at me across the room with an expression I could not fully read. Not quite anger, not quite contempt, something between assessment and cold fury. She held it for 2 full seconds, as though she wanted me to understand that she was memorizing me, cataloging me, deciding something about me that the room would never hear. Then the door closed. When the elevator doors had closed, I sat still for a moment. My heart was beating harder than I wanted it to be. What Derek had said, "You are not as protected as you think you are," played once in my mind, and Sandra's last look played alongside it, and I let them both play. Then I let them become fuel. I had sat in that room, looked at both of them, and not moved. I had not flinched from Sandra's careful inventory of my smallness, and I had not been seduced by her attempt to turn solidarity into surrender. I had not softened at Derek's manufactured regret. The fear I felt on the drive home was real, but it was not the fear of someone who was going to change course. It was the fear of someone who understood finally and fully the size of what she was up against, and had decided that size was not the relevant variable. The federal meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday in January at the Charlotte Field office of the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit on Woodlawn Road. It was not a trial. It was not an arraignment. It was what investigators call a structured interview, a formal, recorded session in which the subject's cooperation is documented and assessed. I was not the subject. I was the witness. Derek and Sandra Maddox had both been issued federal grand jury subpoenas 2 weeks prior. Neither had been given the option of declining. Their attorneys, 2 different firms, I noted with some satisfaction, which meant they were no longer presenting a unified strategy, had negotiated the terms of their appearances. They would be there. I would be there. And for the first time since October, everything that had happened would be in the same room at the same time. Diane had prepared me for 6 weeks, not for theatrics, not for confrontation, for precision. "You tell the truth in the exact order it happened," she had said in our final preparation session. "You use the documents. You do not speculate. You do not editorialize. The case makes itself. Your job is to be the most credible witness in the room." I wore a dark navy blazer and flat shoes and carried a folder that held a timeline I had constructed, document by document from October through January. Every call, every voicemail, every letter, every PACER filing. The Ring camera footage of Derek standing on my porch for 4 minutes, ringing twice, leaving. The certified mail receipts, the voice memos, the offer from Whitmore and Galt, with its careful 7 uses of the word resolution, the PACER filing connecting Halcyon Meridian, LLC to Sandra Maddox, the SEC inquiry, all of it indexed, dated, sequentially organized. I had been building it for 3 months. It was not dramatic. It was architecture. The night before, I had sat at my kitchen table for an hour and gone through the folder one final time, not to memorize it, but to inhabit it. Each document was a moment I had lived through. The certified mail receipt was the morning I had stood at the post office counter in the dark of early November, before work, before anyone else was awake, and decided that every action I took would leave a mark that could not be erased. The voice memo of Derek's threatening voicemail was the evening I had sat in my car in my own driveway, unable to go inside because my hands were shaking. The Whitmore and Galt letter was the Wednesday morning I had read the word resolution 7 times and felt for the first time not frightened, but certain. I knew the story inside the folder because I had lived it, and I had lived it carefully. And no one in that federal building was going to tell me a version of it that I did not recognize. Derek arrived with his attorney at 9:08 a.m. He did not look at me in the corridor. Sandra arrived separately at 9:14, her attorney walking close beside her. the posture of someone expecting the ground to move. I sat with Diane in a waiting area and watched them and felt very calm, in the way you feel calm when you have done everything you could do and the outcome is now in the hands of a process larger than any individual in the room. The session began at 9:30. The lead investigator was a woman named Special Agent Kara Simmons, mid-40s, unhurried, with the quiet authority of someone who has heard every version of every story and is only interested in the one that matches the documents. I gave my account first in sequence with my folder open in front of me and each piece of evidence offered as I reached it chronologically. Simmons asked 12 questions. I answered 11 with documents and 1 from memory. The session took 40 minutes. Then they brought in Derek and Sandra together at their attorney's request to address the financial records Simmons had subpoenaed from both Piedmont First National and the Delaware institution holding Halcyon Meridian's accounts. I was not in the room for that session. I sat with Diane in the corridor and we drank bad coffee from a machine, and I listened to nothing because there was nothing to hear through closed federal doors. The corridor was beige and fluorescent and smelled faintly of copy paper and burnt coffee, and I thought about how the most consequential rooms in a life often look the most indistinguishable from every other room. Nothing about that hallway announced itself. Nothing suggested that on the other side of a standard issue door, the story of the last 3 months was reaching its resolution. But I learned afterward from Simmons, in the brief debrief she conducted with Diane and me before we left, what had happened. The Delaware records showed that $22,418,000 had been wired from a Halcyon Meridian account to Piedmont First National on the evening of October 14th. The intended recipient, according to Halcyon's own internal correspondence subpoenaed from their email server, was not Claire Maddox. It was a numbered LLC that Derek Maddox had established 3 months earlier and never capitalized. The routing number on file for that LLC at Piedmont First National was 1 digit off from my account number. 1 digit. The money had arrived in my account because of a clerical error. A real one, after all, but not the kind that exonerated anyone. Because the email correspondence also showed that Sandra Maddox had discovered the error within hours and had made the decision not to correct it, not to call the bank, not to initiate a recall, but to wait and see, to use my name, my account, my compliance background as a potential buffer. If investigators came, there would be a real person attached to a real account with a real professional history. A fall address. When Sandra and Derek were shown this correspondence in the interview room, their accounts diverged. Derek said Sandra had made the decision alone. Sandra said the LLC had been Derek's idea and the error had been his firm's. Each blamed the other with the precision of 2 people who had rehearsed together and then, under pressure, abandoned the rehearsal. Simmons had noted this divergence and pressed each of them separately on the timeline. When had they each first learned of the misdirected wire? The answers were incompatible by 4 days. One of them was lying about the sequence. Possibly both were. She asked each of them 3 follow-up questions. Their answers did not align on any of them. When Diane and I walked to the elevator at 12:17 p.m., I carried my folder under my arm and felt something I hadn't felt since October. The clean, uncomplicated feeling of a person who has told the truth and watched it hold. The federal process moved the way federal processes move, not quickly, but with the kind of weight that doesn't reverse direction once it has begun. The grand jury indictments came down in late March, 4 months after the January interview, 6 months after the deposit. Derek Maddox was indicted on 3 counts: wire fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and obstruction of justice for the voicemail he had left threatening adverse federal misunderstanding. Sandra Maddox was indicted on 4 counts: wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and filing a false corporate registration document in Delaware, the Halcyon Meridian Formation, which had contained material misrepresentations about the company's capitalization and operations. Richard Hale, Senior Vice President of Private Client Services at Piedmont First National, was indicted separately on 2 counts of conspiracy and 1 count of accessory after the fact. He had been the one who had put instructions on my account, not to reverse the transfer, but to route any inquiry calls from account holder C. Maddox to his direct line. He had known about the misdirected funds within 12 hours of the deposit and had said nothing to regulators because Sandra Maddox had been a private client of the bank for 9 years and represented, Simmons later told Diane, a relationship the institution was reluctant to disturb. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency opened a formal supervisory examination of Piedmont First National. The bank entered a consent order within 40 days, agreeing to implement enhanced wire transfer controls and third-party transaction monitoring, to submit to 18 months of federal oversight, and to pay a civil penalty of $4.3 million. They also sent me a formal letter of apology for the handling of your inquiry in October, signed by the CEO, which Diane framed and hung in her conference room as, she said, a reminder of what stonewalling looks like when the other side doesn't blink. The $22,418,000 was recalled from my account via a court-ordered reversal on November 19th, 5 weeks after it had arrived. My balance returned to $3,847, less than $94 I had spent on certified mail and a safety deposit box. Diane's fees were significant, and I paid them, and I did not regret $1. She had been worth considerably more. When I wrote the final check to her firm, she handed me a copy of the indictment documents with a yellow sticky note on the front that said, simply, "You did this." I still have it in the same folder as the certified mail receipts and the Whitmore and Galt letter and the Ring camera footage. The folder lives in a filing cabinet in my home office, and I have never needed to open it again, which is the best thing I can say about it. On the afternoon the indictments were announced, I sat at my kitchen table with Booth in my lap and read the Justice Department press release on my phone. It was 4 paragraphs. It named Derek and Sandra Maddox and Richard Hale. It described the scheme, using a misdirected wire transfer and an unwitting account holder, to create a buffer entity in a money laundering operation, in 2 clean sentences. The unwitting account holder was not named. I was a Charlotte resident whose account received the transfer and who promptly reported it to authorities. I read that phrase twice. Promptly reported it to authorities. That was all I had done. That was the whole of my heroism. I had not spent the money, had not hidden it, had not accepted the offer, had not been managed. I had done the thing that is supposed to be obvious and turned out to be rare. I had simply told the truth from the first moment and kept telling it. Through the silence on the phone and the visit to my porch and the conference room and the offer with its 7 careful resolutions and the meeting where Sandra had tried to make me see myself as small. Every time I had told the truth, and every time the truth had held, and it turned out that was enough. That the accumulation of ordinary honesty, documented and delivered on time, was a stronger structure than anything they had built. Paul called that evening. "I told you," he said. "You told me," I agreed. "How do you feel?" I thought about it for a moment. Booth shifted in my lap, resettling with the proprietary comfort of a creature who has never doubted his place in a room. "Like myself," I said. "Like exactly myself." Nina came over on Saturday with champagne, actual champagne, not sparkling wine, and a grocery bag containing the ingredients for the pasta carbonara she knew I loved and never made for myself. We cooked it together in my kitchen and ate it at the table by the window, and the winter light came through the glass at a low angle and lay across the table, and Booth sat on the chair between us pretending he wasn't interested in the pasta, and I thought, this is what you protect when you protect yourself, not the money. I had never wanted the money. This, the table, the light, the friend, the cat, the ordinary evening earned back. Derek's trial date was set for September. Sandra's attorney filed 3 motions to separate her case, all denied. Richard Hale reached a plea agreement in May, agreeing to testify against both Maddoxes in exchange for a reduced sentence. His cooperation was, Diane said, thorough and unfortunate for them. I went to work. I reviewed compliance files. I ate lunch at my desk. I called Nina every Sunday. I drove my 7-year-old Honda Accord. I was not the same person I had been in October. No one survives that kind of thing unchanged. But I was more myself than I had been, not less. The person who had sat in Diane Reyes's conference room and looked at Derek Maddox and said, "I understand it now," that was not a version of me I intended to lose. Derek Maddox was convicted on all 3 counts in September and sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. His commercial real estate firm, Maddox Capital Group, had already collapsed. The combination of federal scrutiny, the withdrawal of 2 major investors who had been quietly connected to Halcyon Meridian, and a civil suit filed by a business partner who claimed Derek had misrepresented a property deal in 2021 had reduced the company to a shell that was formally dissolved in July. The building he'd owned on South Boulevard in Charlotte sold at a loss in a court-supervised liquidation. I read about it in the Charlotte Business Journal in a 3-paragraph item on a Tuesday morning, and then set the paper down and drank my coffee. Sandra Maddox went to trial in November and was convicted on 3 of 4 counts. The jury acquitted her on the false registration charge, a minor technical victory that her attorney had clearly been aiming for, and which made no practical difference to her sentence. She received 5 years. The judge noted in sentencing that her decision to allow the misdirected funds to remain in my account rather than correct the error, a decision she had made within hours deliberately while I was still asleep, had demonstrated a willingness to expose an innocent private individual to federal jeopardy for personal convenience. I was not in the courtroom for her sentencing. Diane sent me the transcript. Richard Hale, whose plea agreement had been contingent on his testimony, received 18 months and was permanently barred from working in the banking industry. His testimony, Diane said, had been the structural center of the prosecution's case. His account of Sandra's instructions to him, documented in text messages he had preserved on a personal phone, had been what the jury had found most damning. Piedmont First National quietly replaced its entire private client services leadership team within 6 months of the consent order. The bank's stock dropped 14% in the quarter following the regulatory announcement and had recovered by the following year to a level that suggested the market had decided it would survive. I closed my account there in November and moved to a credit union. My own life changed in ways that were both smaller and larger than I had expected. Diane Reyes referred me to 2 financial crimes attorneys who were building out a compliance consulting practice and looking for a partner with operational expertise. I met with them in February, had 3 conversations over 6 weeks, and signed an agreement in March. I gave my notice at the insurance firm in April professionally, with appropriate gratitude for 15 years of good employment, and spent 2 weeks training my replacement. In June, I began working as a senior compliance consultant, advising firms on anti-money laundering controls and transaction monitoring architecture. The work was harder and more interesting and paid considerably more. It used everything I knew. I kept the house on Pembroke Lane. I put a new roof on it in August, which I had been deferring for 2 years. I painted the back porch a deep, dusty green that I had seen in a magazine and thought about for longer than was rational. It looked exactly right. Paul Weston came to Charlotte for a weekend in the fall. We walked through Freedom Park on a Saturday afternoon while the leaves were turning and talked about his new project and my new practice, and the particular relief of being on the other side of something hard. He had brought good whiskey. We drank it on the back porch in the evening, the green porch, while Booth patrolled the yard with his usual bureaucratic gravity, and the city made its quiet sounds beyond the fence. "Do you think about it a lot?" Paul asked. "Less than I thought I would," I said. And that was true. The events of the previous year had the quality of things fully processed, present when called, not intrusive. They had changed me in the direction of clarity, not damage. I knew what I was capable of in both directions, the fear and the steadiness. I had seen both, and they had turned out to coexist without contradiction. Nina finished writing the novel she'd been working on for 3 years. I was the first person she let read it, and it was genuinely good, a fact I told her with the particular satisfaction of being right about a friend. The farmer's market started carrying a goat cheese from a farm in Watauga County that I became unreasonably devoted to. I went every Saturday. I drove the Honda. I was happy in the plain structural sense, the way you are happy when your life fits you. Not because nothing difficult had happened, but because difficult had turned out to be survivable, and surviving it had revealed something about me that I might otherwise have spent another 20 years not knowing. I learned 3 things that year. The first, ordinary people are chosen precisely because they seem like they won't fight back. The second, the most powerful thing you can do in a system designed to confuse you is document everything and find someone who knows the rules better than the people breaking them. The third, silence, offered money, and the suggestion that you are too small to win. These are not facts. They are tactics. What would you have done with $22 million in your account and a voice on the phone saying it wasn't a mistake?